I think it was the 15th of August, 2014. I was at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and when I'm at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, I normally do between about 7 and 8 gigs a day. And people will go, why do you do so many gigs? If you don't do loads of gigs, you just sit in cafes going, oh, The Guardian haven't been in yet. Oh, I've got 3 stars from the list. Have you had anyone from telly? So I think rather than sitting there, whining, doing 1 show a day, do 9 shows a day. Go out there, do lots of different things. So I find it a fascinating experiment every August. And on this particular day, the final show that I was doing was one called Cheaper Than Therapy, which was different comics every night, and they were generally, the idea was it was to make money for the charity Mind, and each night 3 or 4 comics would go on, and they would do a routine that really vented their spleen, or they would actually maybe do a routine that actually was about therapy itself, but how comedy might be used as therapy, but it was generally a stand-up show. And I said to the promoter, Christian, I said, why don't we, as well as doing the stand-up bits, why don't we have a conversation afterwards so that we can broaden out? We don't just have to nail everything to jokes. So we all did our routines, and then there was an interval, and it was a place called Greyfriars Kirk House. Everyone went off to have a drink, and it was the normal kind of energetic, boozy hubbub of midnight at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. And I didn't have a phone. Everyone else, when they walk out, of course, they immediately turn on their phone. What's happened in the hour? And there was this moment where across the room, I would say it was like a kind of domino effect of silence until it was quite a kind of palpable silence. And I didn't know what was going on, but I knew something had happened. And I went over to someone that I knew from other gigs. I said, Susie, what's going on? Why is everyone so quiet? And she went, don't you know? I said, no. She went, it's Robin Williams. Robin Williams has died. He's killed himself. And it was a genuinely shocking moment. I think it takes a lot to kind of knock out the cheap facetiousness of a bunch of half-drunk comics, but that did it. Everyone was very quiet, and there was a level of confusion about what had happened. So, there was that level of just shock because it was someone who was an icon, and only 2 months before Rick Mayall had died, who again was someone that I absolutely adored and was one of the reasons that I think I propelled myself into comedy. And I was also interested in Robin Williams because I knew there was a compassion about him as well. So the next day I opened the newspapers, and all of the newspapers go with the same, tears of a clown, another tragic funny man, and it turns it into a singular story, and it turned it into a banality. It turned something which may have been done for many different reasons into, oh, well, that's just the narrative arc of comedians, isn't it? And, there may be many different reasons that Robin Williams decided to kill himself, amongst other things. Some of you might know he was suffering from a particularly insidious form of dementia called Lewy bodies dementia. There's lots of different reasons. And I thought with all of these myths about comedians, all of those, BBC 4 and the channels, they all love that once-a-year documentary which will be about Frankie Howard or Tommy Cooper or Peter Sellers or Kenneth Williams, where they go, Kenneth Williams made the whole of Britain laugh, but he himself was as miserable as sin, right? And it's this nice, easy kind of... it's interesting. There's a friend of mine, Peter, who knew Kenneth Williams in the last few years of his life, and he loves reading those stories and watching the documentaries, and then I ring him up and find out what was wrong. One of his favourites is they go, Kenneth Williams wouldn't allow anyone to use his toilet. And Peter said, that's rubbish. I used his toilet on loads of occasions. The only people he didn't allow to use his toilet were people who were beginning to bore him. So if they were in his flat and they went, oh, Kenneth, can I just go to your loo? He'd go, oh, no, you can't go to my toilet. No, you'll have to go outside. And then once they went outside, he'd lock the door, and when they came back, he'd pretend to be asleep. So this is what I find. First of all, I find the fact that all human beings are a multitude fascinating and beautiful. And I also then thought how interesting it is that because of this, the legends of comedians, because the myths are so often retold, how much can we learn from the fact that what is true of comedians is probably actually true of an enormous number of human beings. We are only so we are sometimes the megaphone of the taboos that other people don't want to say. But we go up on stage for 2 hours and go, look at me, here's a weird thing. I knew that I started to get it right. About 10 years ago, I was doing a gig in Nottingham, and afterwards a man came up to me and went, I'm quite annoyed with you. I said, oh, sorry, what have I done? He went, well, I've just sat in with your audience, right? And I've spent my whole life believing that I am quite weird. But sitting with your audience and watching your show, I've realised we're all bloody weird, which means I'm quite normal, which is disappointing. And that to me is, I mean, I love those moments of connection that can occur. I did a whole show which was about those thoughts that you have where maybe, the example I would often give was, you're holding a baby just by a balcony, and suddenly out of nowhere you go, oh my goodness, I just imagined throwing the baby over the balcony. I must be somebody who wants to throw babies over balconies. I shouldn't have a baby in my hands. You want her back, okay, right? So, and I would often say to an audience who's had those kind of thoughts, and very often the hands were quite slow in going up. And, but I would talk about those things. Sometimes you have those thoughts when you're standing on a train station platform, when you're in a car and you imagine grabbing the steering wheel, all of those things. And I would go off on lots of different tangents, but I would then at the end explain that when you have those thoughts, it's not because you have an urge, it's quite the opposite. At moments of jeopardy, like holding a baby near a balcony, your brain plays a public information film. It basically goes, you're holding a baby, so remember, when holding a baby, don't throw it over a balcony. But it delivers it in a slightly cack-handed way, so you go, is that a desire? And I would get people coming up to me afterwards, and there was a lovely one with a lad who was probably only in his late teens. He said, I'm so relieved to find that out. He said, my sister had a baby 4 months ago, and I had this little thought one day, and I've been too scared to hold her baby.